have made it to the last class. Really happy everyone is here to show off some cool work. This is my favorite class of the 5 weeks because I only talk for like 20 minutes, 30 minutes of it. So it'll be really fun for me to sort of sit back and relax and see what people make. So yeah, so today I just have a little bit of sort of like, as we started to talk about before class started, like some folks are really interested in sort of seeing what else is out there. So I've got a list of sort of resources, some other folks to check out who are cool AI artists, a bunch of classes that I've done outside of SSHH that I've got recordings up on YouTube. So if you want to check those stuff out, I'll talk through some of that as well. Yeah, and so like I hope you've enjoyed this very quick class and this very quick introduction to machine learning. And if you haven't, that's also fun because you sort of learn that like, oh, I don't really like this type of work, and like that's good to know too. I find that like there are definitely some people who are like, yeah, this kind of like making my own data set was frustrating and I never want to do it again, and I probably would never will do it again, and that's totally fine. But I hope that if anything, you've learned a little bit about like the concepts of machine learning, so that even when, you know, I think Ryan was mentioning this, like it's starting to come up in more conversations in more places. And even if you find that you don't want to do this work day in, day out, like you can at least understand how a lot of it works. And then you can have conversations with people about like, you know, what are the pitfalls of machine learning for designers or artists or other things out in the world. So I hope if anything, at the bare minimum, you learned a little bit about machine learning and can sort of take that out into the world through the rest of your experiences. I'm going to share my screen. Cool. As I mentioned, we'll just sort of talk about some ways in which you can keep learning. Some of those are through me, some of those are through other places, and then we'll do our show and tell. So I doubt we'll be here the whole 2 hours. In my experience, people generally present for 5 to 10 minutes, which means the schedule will shift a little bit. I know Ryan's going first, but basically just, and I'll just call you out as we go through the list, so you don't need to keep track, but just know your time might shift a little bit just depending on how long people present for. But again, show and tell should be just cool, low key, just show us what you've been working on. Some of that you've probably already put in Slack, and that's totally fine. And you know, if you don't have that much to show, that's also totally fine, but what I'd love to hear is just like, what did you find interesting? If you were to continue keep doing this, like what would you want to keep working on? If there are places where you found like this really sucked, I hated the experience of this, I think everyone loves to hear that too, because I think that also tells us like maybe there's a place to improve. Maybe if there's things I can improve in the class, or maybe just like things that people can build and tools and that sort of thing. So the Runway folks just announced they got some more funding from various VCs, so they'll definitely be building out tools and that sort of thing. So if you have feedback for them, I talk to Chris pretty much like once a week or so. So you're more than welcome to sort of send that feedback my way. Speaking of feedback, at the end of this sort of little session, I do have a survey that I'll also post in our Slack channel. This is the 6th time I've taught this class now, and pretty much every time it changes a little bit. So really appreciate folks' feedback on if like, I really like this section, I wish we had spent more time on it, or like, I didn't find any use for this section, we can just skip it next time. Those sort of things really help me. 2 or 3 sessions ago, people said, oh, I wish I would have seen more of my classmates' work. So I decided to add in the show and tell week and compress everything else. So I do take all the feedback really seriously, and you're welcome. There's a little, it's a Google form. I'll post it in the Slack channel as well as it's in this deck. You can post anonymously if you don't want to tell me with your name. Post with your name. Any of that stuff is totally valuable. And like I said, I take it pretty seriously and do try to integrate it into my work. So yeah, any feedback is more than welcome. Okay, cool. So let's chat really quickly just about some other stuff that is available to you. So I'm sure, like I've already heard a couple of you folks already saying like, you know, what else is out there? What else should I be learning? Or like, how can I learn? And quite honestly, maybe you've also started to feel like you're hitting the limits of Runway ML. You know, Runway is a cool tool. It's really meant for folks who have no machine learning skills or like no coding skills or that sort of thing. And you might have started to like just feel like, oh, you know, it's kind of expensive, or like I've seen other people that are maybe getting better results elsewhere. How are they doing that? So outside of SSHH, I do teach a number of other classes. This year, my co-teacher Leah and I like sort of decided that we would like spend most of the pandemic teaching brand new courses, which was pretty exhausting, but also a lot of fun. So we went through just like a whole session. Basically, we started with a Runway class, and then we went all the way to the end of like writing your own code and training your own network sort of on a server. So we have a bunch of classes that are all recorded and up there. So I'll just talk through a couple of these. So the first one is this class called Make ML Art with Collab. Collab is this web page from Google it's kind of like Runway, except there's no GUI, there's no nice interface, it's a lot of code. It's usually what I recommend to folks after Runway because it's pretty affordable. If you want to like get into their like pro tools or their pro version of it, it's $10 a month. You get access to some pretty fast machines. There's some limitations in like how long you can run stuff for. All that's covered in this class. I believe it's a 3 or 4 week class. So this just links out to the YouTube videos of each course, and you can just sort of like, I think they're 2 hours each. Watch them at a 1.5 speed or whatever. And they should teach you like sort of the basics of getting up and running on Collab. Like Runway, Collab is one of those things where lots of people have contributed their own what they call notebooks, and you can access those notebooks and run them. Leah and I have made a bunch of notebooks and sort of shared them through some of the class links that are on there. So there is stuff like you can train your own style guide model in Collab. It's kind of an annoying process. It's like basically your machine restarts every 20 hours. So you have to sort of like keep restarting it. But you can actually, we'll talk about like one of the StyleGAN classes that I taught. There is like a newer version of StyleGAN that I don't think Runway is using yet, that I find does have pretty good results. So you could try that. And again, $10 a month for pretty much infinite usage. So it's pretty nice in that regard. So check out that class if you're sort of looking for the next step. I will say the notebooks are like very code heavy. But one thing that Leah and I try to do with our classes is we try to like document the notebooks. Notebooks are basically, you can write a lot of text and then there's like these code cells you run. So you don't really have to know how the code works as long as you can read through the documentation. So it's pretty nice, and it's sort of the next step or the next iteration for folks who are ready to get off Runway. We also, I believe in September or something, taught this class on making data sets. So I know I linked to this previously for folks making data sets, but if you're interested in diving a little bit deeper into like making a custom data set, this actually ended up being a 4-week class because I added a 4th week on to show some like Illustrator and Photoshop tools to generate really nice data sets or like write scripts and that sort of thing. So if you found that like data sets were hard, but you're interested in like diving in deeper and trying to like unearth some new tools or other ways to approach it, I definitely recommend this course. There's lots of like also discussion about like, how do I determine if my data set is diverse enough, or how do I like, add additional elements to my data set. So there's a lot of like sort of tips and tricks that I've learned over the past 2 or 3 years of doing this, included in that class. So actually before Runway was sort of fully built out, I think they only released training maybe at the end of this year or the beginning of this year. I actually don't remember. So before the previous versions of SSHH were this class that I called AI 2.1. This is the first version I taught of it remotely, which happened in January. God, that feels like it was 3 years ago and it was only like a year ago. So this class will cover some additional things. If you've heard me talk about Pix2Pix or CycleGAN, or if you've heard me sort of trash the style transfer versions that are inside Runway, this is where there's a bunch of other stuff. So this course goes into using this server called Paperspace, which is basically, it's actually the Paperspace Runway, the Runway folks work out of the Paperspace offices, but Paperspace is like a machine you can rent hourly from Paperspace that can do machine learning and that sort of thing. The cost is like 75 cents an hour, so it's pretty expensive. But I go through a bunch of different tools you can use training directly on there. Again, it's a little bit more advanced than I would say the Runway classes. But again, I would say if you can follow steps, step by step, you don't really need to know the code that's going on behind the scenes. Which is true of like almost all of my stuff. I would say very rarely do you need to know like code to be able to make it work. Sometimes you will hit errors, and when you hit those errors, you're welcome to like DM me or post in the more general Slack channels about errors, and usually someone can help you out with those things. Ideally, if you follow my steps perfectly, you shouldn't run into errors, but that never really ends up being the case. So, outside this class, you're always welcome to like message me and say like, hey, I ran into an error trying to run this on Collab. What's going on? Just know I am probably less or some slower to respond, but I usually will try to respond when I can. So this class was sort of the very first or second iteration of the SSHH classes, so it should still be like pretty accessible. But yeah, it's definitely a little bit heavier than just using Runway. So as I mentioned, there is a like new version of StyleGAN that came out about 2 or 3 months ago now. And I don't think they've yet implemented it inside Runway, but they probably will soon. It's called StyleGAN ADA. ADA stands for, I actually totally don't remember. I don't even remember what it stands for. Basically, there's a new process that helps generate better fake imagery using some additional techniques. And it's meant to work better with smaller data sets, which tends for most of us to be what we have, right? So they say it's good for, data sets of about 1,000 images, which is generally what I recommend for this class anyway, but like it really does work better for smaller data sets. So previous versions of StyleGAN had been trained on like data sets with like 50 or 70,000 images, which is really hard for most of us to get to. So if you go around and play with StyleGAN ADA, you might find that it works better. So this is again a 3-week class. It's just sort of like this one goes into a little bit more detail of how the model actually works. And then it sort of shows you a couple different techniques of places to use this, that sort of thing. So it's definitely a little bit deeper. Yes, Steve. So Steve, yeah, you should definitely do 50,000 drawings all on Twitch. Yes. StyleGAN ADA is just like it's a much improved version. And I find it works a lot better for small data sets. There's some annoyances with it that I sort of go into in the class. Basically, I started teaching this class the week after this new model had been released. So I kind of like was quickly updating it on my end as I was building stuff out. So I learned a lot as I was going through it. But it's definitely a cool library. And there's also, if you liked sort of the last week of class, which was more like sharing videos and different ways of sharing videos, there's a lot more here to go into how to do some of that on Colab, actually. Colab tends to be where I actually personally do most of my video production or like creating of images and video, just because Colab is a pretty quick service to use. So I have a bunch of like GPUs that I use personally for my own practice on a Linux machine here at my apartment. So those are mostly running trainings 24/7. And then when I'm generating stuff, I'll bring them into Colab to generate video and audio because it's sort of a quick hour-long process. So I don't really recommend that people like jump onto like building their own machines. One, because it's pretty expensive and it can get pretty complicated. But I would say like if you find that like 6 months from now you're doing this every day or like many days out of the week, you may find that it's more cost efficient to move to your own machine, which I do have some videos about, but like they're kind of out of date now. It's really hard to like stay up to date on all that stuff. But if you're interested, I'm happy to like give some options about how to do that. And then in like, I guess in March or April, Leah and I taught this class was it was a StyleGAN deep dive. So it's sort of confusing because like this is the newest version of that class, but it's only 3 weeks and it mostly goes into training. Whereas this class is sort of like a 5 or 6 week long class that covers training and then covers a lot more of the image generation techniques. So I'd sort of recommend that you like watch this class and then skip the first 2 to 3 weeks of this class and go right to the like image generation stuff. In part because we cover like some of what ArtBreeder does, or we cover some additional like things you can't do within Runway at all to generate images and videos. So a lot of things we talk about in sort of like the last couple weeks of this class are what's called feature vectors. And feature is like, say you have a data set of faces and you want to like learn how can I make this face grow a beard, right? So I've got a face that has no beard on it. How do I add a beard? So that's like this idea of feature vectors. It's something that Photoshop's added a lot to their tools recently. But we go into a lot of like different ways to explore feature vectors, lots of different ways to manipulate them. We go into some deeper versions of audio reactive stuff. So if you found that cool, there's more there as well. And all this again, like sort of runs on Colab. So you should be able to just like manipulate stuff there. And the videos should still work. The funny thing about machine learning is like 6 months old means it plays like an era ago and like lots of stuff changes really quickly. So you'll notice that like I would say 90% of the people in the StyleGAN channel and my current Slack thing are basically like, this thing broke, what happened? And it's just like, the thing is out of date now and like you have to like, I have to go either go fix it or I have to be like, move on to this thing. So it's kind of the challenge of a lot of this stuff is like, you do end up losing time just because they're like, oh, this like no longer works. I have to figure out how to fix it or I have to find someone else to fix it, which is why lots of folks like Runway because the Runway folks will fix it for you. So here it's a little bit more wild west and you're kind of on your own, but it's still pretty cool. And I find that 70% of the stuff is doable out of the box with the steps I give you, and then The other 25% is usually something I can fix and then update folks on pretty easily. So yeah, there's lots of comments and stuff. If you dig around in the other Slack channels, there's a StyleGAN channel, which is probably the most active one just because that tends to be the thing that most people know me for, or like stuff that I've worked on before. So there's lots of tools in the wild that I've built, and then people come to me and say, hey, this thing is broken, can you fix it? And if I have time, I can, or if it's a part of my process, I can, but sometimes that just be like, I can't really do anything there. So yeah, so these are all courses that we taught this year. So, and all the recordings are up. They should mostly link back to slide decks as well. If you're not seeing a slide deck or you want to know more, like just reach out to me and I'm happy to link to that stuff. So, you know, all these are all on YouTube, and the price of admission is just paying for watching the ads, or if you've got an ad blocker, you get it for free. Yeah, so it's just like, I just find it's nice if I just like put that stuff up and then people can find it on their own and do whatever they want with it. So, but yeah, you're always welcome to reach out to me if you have other questions, or if you're like, hey, I was watching this video and I don't really understand it. I'm happy to like talk through that when I can. Is it a blank slide? What is this? Okay, I don't know what that slide is supposed to be. So if outside of the sort of the Derek Schultz ecosystem, there are some additional like places to check out videos. First off, Runway has a YouTube channel, and they post pretty frequently. Like I would say, like, you know, once a month or so, they're posting demos and tutorials on how to use their own tools. So I didn't really link to a lot of this stuff because it was sort of my job to like walk you through things. But if you are interested, there's some additional stuff on the Runway channel. Like I know we didn't really touch text generation or text training, and they cover some stuff in there. Lots of folks ask about the first order motion model, which is like doing lip syncing and that sort of thing, and they walk you through some of that stuff. Yeah, I just had to like sort of like decide what to teach in 4 weeks, and some things got cut, but Runway covers a lot of other stuff, so you might find there's some value on there. Gene Kogan, who actually does about 75% of the Runway videos, also teaches a thing called ML for Art. This links to one of his classes he taught maybe a year or two ago at ITP. And it's like a little bit more of a broader survey than like what I sort of do, which is just like image and video generation. He'll go into like motion tracking, you know, text generation. He'll talk a lot about the theory behind this stuff and that sort of thing. So I think this is like a 10-week class, and every video is like an hour and a half long. It's really great. So if you're interested in like a little bit more of theory or just sort of seeing a wider range of what's available to you, I definitely recommend that. And then if you're not familiar with Dan Schiffman is, he's a professor at ITP, and he has a YouTube channel called Coding Train, where he teaches sort of a wide range of stuff. Like he'll teach a lot of P5. So if you thought the P5 class was cool, but you want to learn more, he teaches a lot of stuff around P5. I think he was actually one of the founders of P5, like one of the folks who like sort of maintains it and keeps it up to date. So he's definitely a great person there. But he does have some classes about machine learning as well. So in addition to P5, there's another thing called Ml5 Js, which is running machine learning in JavaScript. It's not as powerful, but it is still kind of cool. So you can run machine learning directly on a web page. So he has a class on that. He's got a class just on like basics of machine learning, like that sort of thing. And he does some Runway videos as well. So those are probably like the big like YouTube channels that I'm aware of for things that are like valuable and good ways to learn. Like they're all educators, or they're all set up to like help educate you. Whereas there are some other machine learning videos out there, but they're more tutorials, or they're just like demos, and sometimes it can be hard to follow. I find that these folks are all pretty good teachers. Every once in a while, people are like, I want to learn a little bit more about machine learning outside of the art world, in which case I sort of recommend these 4 resources. Fast.ai is sort of like, it's kind of how I teach these classes, in that like they're very hands-on. So it's run by 2 professors out of like San Francisco, and they're both really great. And there's like 3 or 4 different classes now of different things there. So if you're interested in like sort of exploring a much wider breadth of machine learning and learning code, like I definitely recommend checking that out. MIT Deep Learning, these are cool. This is just like a lecture series, and it's just like 10 lectures from professors as well as visiting guests lectures, and it's more theory. But if you're really interested in just sort of learning, I can't like, these are like hands down some of the best stuff to just learn or like understand theoretical side stuff about it. There won't really be anything like to do, like there's no like demos or tutorials of this stuff, but it's just more like learning more survey level machine learning stuff. Andrew Ng's course is probably like the most famous machine learning course. Andrew Ng is like one of the bigger like machine learning people in the world. I think this course is like the most popular thing on the internet for machine learning. So it's like a good resource. These classes will be sort of a mix of like, you might get some math, you might get some demos, you might get some theory. It's kind of like a crapshoot. So depending on what you're interested in, you might find value in these, you might find them not valuable. It's sort of up to you. And the last thing I recommend is this book by this guy by the name of Francois Chalot. It's called Deep Learning with Python. I actually just I really like this book because it's really clear. Like a lot of other books get really, really heavily bogged down in math or theory. And I find this book, like Francois created this thing called Keras, which is like one of the bigger machine learning libraries out there. But he just does a really good, succinct job of like explaining different techniques. So if you're interested in how does text machine learning work, how does, how does pix to pix work, or how do GANs work, in a little bit more depth than like maybe you would in one of my classes. This is a really great book. You could honestly read just the text portions and skip the code, and you would still learn a lot out of it. So some folks are just like not video people, and like I'm totally down with that. So this book is a good value if you're interested. Yeah, so there's definitely lots of stuff here to follow through on. I'll also say like what's nice about the machine learning community is it definitely feels a little bit more like a community than other places. So here's just a list of like cool people I think you should check out if you're interested. A list of artists. So Gene Kogan is, again, like he teaches ML4A, but he's also an artist himself. Mario Klingemann is probably one of the more famous machine learning artists out there in the world. Does lots of cool, weird stuff. Robert Luxemburg does a lot of like more audio visual stuff. So there's some cool work there. Scott Eaton is just like this amazing person who's both like a 3D artist, a figure drawer, and a photographer. And he combines them all into like these really weird machine learning models. Keisha Yuma also does some really amazing StyleGAN work. Sophia Crespo is, if you've seen my work before, like Sophia's probably like the closest other machine learning artist to making stuff similar to me. Anna Ridler is, again, another nice artist, and she did this really cool project a couple years ago, which was a GAN that generated flowers, but it was tied to like the Dutch floral stock market. So like some nice conceptual work as well. And David and Rafiq are both like really well-known machine learning artists as well. So you can check out their work. Sometimes they'll tell you how they make stuff. Sometimes they kind of keep it secret. It's just a sort of up to each artist. But I think you'll get some cool, interesting work there. Luba Elliott is a curator. She's like one of the first like real curators to dive into machine learning art. She runs the NER-IPS workshops every year. So actually they just finished a workshop this weekend. NeurIPS happens to be like one of the big machine learning art festivals, science organization things that happens every year. And every year they run like a more creative and art focused one. So they just finished that one. They did it on Saturday. And they put up a bunch of projects from people who submitted work. So I have a project in there. Some other former students of mine have projects in there. So there's lots of good inspiration on that site. I'll link to it in our Slack as well. Lots of cool stuff. And then a couple of music folks. I don't really know the ML music world that well, but there's like a burgeoning community there as well. This is, I think Leah pulled these together and put a couple names in here. So you can probably find some people in there that are cool as well. And then lastly, a little bit of a shameless plug for myself. Obviously you paid for this class already, so like you don't owe me anything, like there's no question here. But if you are interested in like learning more, or like just like I produce a lot of video. I produce like at least a video a week on YouTube that are sort of like external outside of my classes. So if you're interested in supporting that, I do have a Patreon, I do have a YouTube. Both of those give you like perks to things. You get like early access to my video recordings. You get discounts to my store. So I do sell prints as well as other things. And actually all of the classes that I do outside of SSHH are like basically purchased through my store. So I do live classes. It's usually about 10 to 15 people. And they run just like this course for like, 4 to 5 weeks, maybe a little bit longer. So those get announced through my newsletter or my website. Or on the Slack channel. So you can usually sign up for those. And those are just first come, first serve. They don't sell out nearly as quickly as SSHH classes do, which is nice. So like you can just sort of like keep an eye on it. They usually sell out in a couple weeks, but not nearly like a couple hours, which the current SSHH ones are on. And I'll just sort of like, I usually add like a syllabus just about like, hey, here's what this class is going to be about. The one we're probably going to run in January will actually probably not be the best course for this group, just because it'll be about 50% runway and then 50% collab. So like you don't really want to repeat the runway stuff, but if you watch those collab videos, that'll probably cover that. I'm just doing that because one, it's good to just like start people like in the new year, like they have a new like, hey, I want to learn machine learning art. It's a nice way to start that class. And I'm also teaching at ITP in January, so it's like I'm basically just teaching those two classes simultaneously. They're the exact same content, so it's like a nice way for me to like not lose my mind. There was a moment where Leah and I were teaching two classes every week on different content, and I would totally forget like what was what and which class learned what, and it just became a nightmare. So this way, we're just going to do the first quarter will just be like sort of like a basics machine learning class. So part runway and then partly on Colab. So if you have friends who like are really thought what you did was at the SSHH was cool, recommend that class to them. We'll be announcing it probably in the new year. I'll probably also be doing another SSHH class sometime in January or February. I just don't know when yet. I usually talk to those guys after the new year starts. So yeah, so I mostly get new people through my classes, either through this or through recommendations. So I really appreciate if folks recommend these classes, because it generally like one, cool people and they make cool things, and then they do cool stuff with the class, sort of like virtuous cycle. So really appreciate when folks can do that. And again, there's no pressure here to like sign up for any of these things. I just put them out there because if you don't announce it, no one does it. And yeah, so that's pretty much it. So also, like I will say, the YouTube channel, I add content pretty much every week of new stuff, like it's new demos or new things I found. So I'm going to do one thing actually tonight after this class is over. I'm going to record just like some of my favorite projects from Saturday's NeurIPS machine learning workshop, and just sort of highlight some cool things that I found through there. So again, folks can like sort of find new content and new inspiration through that. So that's it for the shameless plugs. So before we kick off doing the actual demos, I do want to say, like, I have a class survey. I'll post this link in Slack. And again, please do fill it out if you feel like giving me feedback. I really appreciate it, and I will take the feedback to heart and try to make changes for the next group. So again, if you recommend folks, it'll be even better next time, was what I hope. So yeah. Any questions, any like, hey, where do I find more about this or that, or like that sort of thing that I can answer now?
Just something that quickly popped in my head when you were talking about prints and the whole printing process. Do you print Glicky? And if you do you have recommendations in terms of online services or New York print houses? Because I know one of my friends is looking to transfer like some of her like 300 pixel, like 1040 by 1048 images into like a print form for like Christmas. And like I know on my side, I've looked at like Redbubble and Society6 and all of those like standard things, but it's been like you know.
Yeah.
So any thoughts?
Yeah, so the first thing that I generally do is I use a super resolution tool. So I actually just posted actually, let me share my screen again. The folks that so I use this tool called what is it called? Gigapixel AI. So Topaz Labs. And I want so these folks called Topaz Labs make these apps, and one of them is Gigapixel AI, which allows you to do super resolution, which allows you to basically res up your images, and they definitely look better than you would get through Photoshop, just up-resing your images. It does that a little bit of just sort of like, machine learning sort of like texture to things, but that's generally what I use. So I'll generally run it through Gigapixel AI, and then I will let's see if what is the tool here? So products, Gigapixel AI. So I'll usually use this for my images. So I'll like double or triple the resolution. So it is printable at like 8 by 8 or 10 by 10, or 12 by 12. 12 by 12 tends to be about as big as I go, just because you do start to like lose some of the quality as you go up. So they're running a sale now on this. It's $70 for basically a year, because you get a year license, or like you can use it forever, but you get updates for a year. And then also in the Slack general channel, I just posted here that I also have a referral code. So this gets you 15% off of that $70. So like you can get like, I don't know what that comes down to. What does that come down to? 70 times 0.85. So $60. Which I honestly like, it's one of the best tools that I use in every day for my machine learning work. And it does allow you to get like decent print resolution. I very rarely have people complain about like the quality of my prints. And it's usually just like they thought they were getting a photograph and they're actually getting like a piece of machine learning art, which is like is weird no matter what. So that's generally what I recommend doing. In terms of print houses, I use a place in Williamsburg called Skink Ink. I just really like working with them. They have like a website. You just upload stuff to them. Skinkink-com. The only downside is they just closed for the winter. So they closed a little bit earlier. So like they don't accept new prints. If you're trying to get stuff out before Christmas, you can't really do that. But they have also the best, like I found that they have the most paper options. So usually it's like, I think I usually use just like the Epson like cold press, which is just like a really nice, has a little bit of texture, which kind of hides some of the issues with machine learning, DPI or whatever. But they also have a bunch of other stuff. There's a couple other services in New York that I've used before, but Skanking just tends to be the one that I go with. Other folks here who are designers might have other people they recommend. But I find that this is good, and they're totally down to do one-off prints. Like a lot of times, like before COVID, I would just like send them something, and then 2 days later I'd go over and pick it up. And I think they have a minimum of like 12 by 12 is like the minimum size, or like for a single print. So if you send an 8 by 8, they'll just charge you a 12 by 12. But if you give them like 3 8 by 8s or whatever, so I like usually end up like batching some orders together, or just printing stuff that I think will sell later and then doing that. So that's generally what I recommend. Is, I mean, they're just the people I go to, and I find them really, really good. They're very like, if I mess up a file, like they'll just be like, hey, I think you messed this up. Do you want to resubmit it? That sort of thing.
Brad, thanks.
Yeah, of course. Anything else from anyone? Okay. Well, now it's my favorite time where I can just stop talking. So again, I really, really appreciate everyone taking this class. I hope you learned something, and I hope we get to see some cool work. Just as a reminder, no one in here is a jerk, so like I don't need to say this, but like, just be cool with everyone's work. I find that like positive suggestions are the best way to go. Like, oh, it'd be cool if you did this too. That's like the best feedback you can give to someone. Or like, oh, I really like this, and I bet if you did this too, like that would also be cool. Yeah. So with that, I'm gonna turn it over to Ryan and just have him start by sharing some of his stuff.
Cool. Okay, cool. Let's see if I get the sharing screen to work. Also, we might have to contend with my son's school. He's online right now. I think he'll be fine, but just just a heads up, just in case stuff gets slow. Let's see. Share screen. Y'all see that? Everyone see? Everyone
Yep,
here?
we're good. Yep.
Cool. I tossed this all in just like a really basic deck because I tend to like waffle on a lot and get off topic. So that said, too, if you have questions, feel free to just like jump in, ask any questions or any thoughts or anything like that, or ring me back to like back to earth here. Okay. But I think in general, like before I start off into any of this, like this is awesome class. I'm like way into this, and as I was mentioning before, I see it creeping into a lot of conversations that I'm having with other illustrators, other designers, and it really starts to, I see it in a lot of conversations, and I see it like being part of my work in certain ways. I do a lot of, as I mentioned before, I do a lot of like risograph printing. And it's just a really fun, quick way to get this analog kind of flair to some of the digital and analog stuff I do. One thing I really like to do with this work is take a bunch of the detritus or like the extras or the scraps and try to reframe them or reshape them or see how a lot of thoughts of like when is art and like when is, how far can you push it with reusing things? And machine learning feels like a very easy next step to that. So that's like my general, like my first like deep dive into like the reason why I wanted to get into machine learning. So again, I wanted to focus on risographs as like my first data set because I have tons of risographs. I did a IG scrape of my work, and my IG, I probably have like 2,000 images, but probably about 600 were risograph prints. There's a lot of variation in some of them as well, like square prints, horizontal prints, but I wanted to stick to this vertical print. And the idea I was trying to go for is like, if I could get a consistent data set, I would like it to almost spit out the exact same or abstract versions that feel like my work in the risographs, but still be kind of consistent. So I had to switch a bunch of things. Like in these, you can see I just rotated them, even though that they were originally horizontal versions of some of these risograph prints. I did also set up like a template. Well, so after that, I probably have about like 420 images, so not quite the 500. I still got pretty excited after the training class. So right after that, I just tossed this in to see like what it would spit out, and I was pretty excited about what it was doing already. So the data set was 420 here. I ended up going 5,000 steps, but originally it's 3,000 steps. The thing, it was great. Again, I liked all this stuff, but I started to see some overfitting and some similar stuff cropping up. So I wanted to make the data set a little bit more robust. So I started just taking pictures of like a bunch of scraps I had around. And here I just like tossed like scraps of risograph prints on this, and I built a template in Photoshop that I would just like dump it in. So I just like dumped all this stuff in. I got the data set to 575, trained it for 6,000 steps, and it started to get around like some stuff I'm liking like a whole lot here. I was relatively surprised by how much I did like it, to be honest. I think I was thinking I was going to get a lot more junk, but I did get more good stuff than I thought. Here's some choice images that I pulled out. And so after this, I got all these images. I liked them a lot. And then I do this, like, it kind of seems ridiculous, but this circular nature of the stuff I do, like print something, take the scraps, make something out of it, and then like do it again. Yeah. So I decided I wanted to take a couple of these and start printing them up on my risograph printer again. The first images that I just did single color black images. So this one on the left is the risograph print, and the one on the right is the original machine learning one. So I did like 3 of those black and white ones. I got comfortable because sometimes I'll have to, in the risograph process, I'm like, should I print a bitmap or JPEG? I was playing around with like the different formats, so I want to slowly step up to like doing some color pieces. I started to do some 2-color and 3-color ones. This is like a black and yellow one taken from this. In the process here, I would just, essentially in Photoshop, copy this, blow out some of the levels, and then there's, I used, it's a good resource, I forgot what it's, Color Library. You could download color profiles from this website for specific ink. You could ink profiles like Pantone, but they also have risograph color profiles, which is cool. So I have 3 inks. I'll just say I want a blue, pink, and yellow one. Give me that profile. Then I could just use separations in Photoshop, print out those separate separations. So this is an example of a 3-color, pink, blue, and yellow. The original on the right, left is the actual risograph image. It's funny is some of these, it started to, the machine learning, let me see, it started to try to interpret my signature that I do on that. It was pretty cool. Another color one, these were fun, where I could like try to tweak the colors a little bit too in the risograph. So I did like some editing of it as well, just to, with like levels, curves, things like that. I did want to make a little zine out of this. Again, like another, I know sometimes this seems kind of, this might seem ridiculous. I'm continuously like investigating these things, but it really, when I do that, it really makes me like get a feel for the forms and like the different things that are happening. It's just a way to get like closer to what's happening. Sounds kind of weird, but anyways, I put together this little zine and I started to print. I just finished printing this up yesterday and a little bit this morning. This is all like, except for this cover, this is just a 3-color risograph print, and it did pretty good. I need to do some better on some of the editing of the photos, and then I could just isolate better ink combinations to get more kind of robust, vibrant inks. Like this one is very green, but it's still using a pink, blue, and yellow. And if I just used my green ink and yellow, it'd probably be way more vibrant. I'm still tweaking some of the pages, but I took this original set rights here, and this is just all the different pages in it. So I did pretty, I mean, it was pretty cool. I mean, it did pretty well for a first kind of pass at it. I would like to, this is 5, excuse me, it's 5 by 6.5. So I kind of would like to do a bigger one. And this is, Derek, that resource that you just mentioned about the resizing would be cool, because for these are 11 by 14. And I just did some of the image resizing in Runway, and that tended to work fine. But I think like I would even do those to some of these other images. But yeah, so like I was actually way more happy with the way this stuff turned out than I thought I would be. I think next steps for Risograph specific is trying to train a bunch of different data sets based on different styles of mediums that I use. So maybe a data set of spray paint textures, a data set of brush textures, and then bring those in differently and isolate, like layer them upon each other. I think that would be a fun thing. And then I'm probably going to sell some of the cynical point of view of like reusing stuff too is just to like get as much money out of the shit as possible. But that was fun. How much time do I have? Am I over yet or anything?
You got a minute or two.
Okay, I'll do this other stuff really quick. So I trained some other stuff just to get just to play around, have fun. This one was, I did a lot of IG scraping, and I think I might have like got banned or something. It won't work anymore. But I did one for Looney Tunes background. It did some pretty wild stuff. It actually looked like some landscapes. I did this New Yorker with like the Hockney cover of this past week or this week. A lot of us illustrators were talking about like what constitutes like art, what tools are we using, and then it's like again, the natural extension of that is like who the hell, like if this were published, whose name would be on it, like the previous artist, the machine, the all that kind of stuff. It was fun. I thought I had some more. I did like I trained a bunch of stuff, you know. Hopefully I can sell some stuff to make some money back on all that training. But I did like a Seinfeld ambient one. I did one about like some album cover artwork. Yeah, a bunch of, okay. I'm starting to ramble now, but okay. I did, this is based on, so this was based on a bunch of the album artwork that I was listening to this year. So on Bandcamp,
if you're sharing, sorry, Ryan, if you're sharing new images, we can't see anything.
Oh, cool.
I think you might just have what I would say is, just to keep us moving, like just post them in Slack. Yeah, post them in Slack. That'd be fun to see.
Cool.
This is really cool. Awesome. I'm really excited to see sort of like Steve mentioned, the analog to the digital to analog, let's sort of flip flop back and forth. One thing you might want to take a look at is you can't really do this in Runway that well, but there's a thing called projection, which is you can take an image from outside your data set and put it through the model, and it finds like the nearest representation of that image in your model. So it's kind of like almost creates a more glitched out version of images that you've got elsewhere. So for anyone that's interested in doing that, I have I think that StyleGAN deep dive class has a way that shows you how to do that. So would definitely recommend checking that out, because I think there's some interesting ways in which you could do that. I would definitely recommend Collab for you, because you're burning through a lot of Runway credits, which I'm sure they're very happy about, but you might save yourself a little bit of cash to do it on Collab. But yeah, this is all really cool.
That's good. Yeah, cool. Thanks. This was really fun. Thanks.
Yeah, of course. Who's up next? I think Violet. I think you're next. Is that right? Oops, I lost my slide. Let me. Yes, Violet, you're next.
Okay, cool. I'm going to share my screen. Okay. Is that visible to everyone? Okay, cool.
It is. Yeah.
So I don't have too much to show, but I mostly worked on 2 models that I trained. The first one was trained on a data set of paintings of nude women, mostly from like Baroque era, and also a lot of like impressionist paintings and some like fauvism. But here is, I'll just like kind of go through some of the images that I picked out. Oh, and here I think I experienced a little bit of overfitting, I think, because I was playing with like the truncation and the sampling distance, and it was pretty much just spitting out very, very similar images the whole time. So I think that has to do with my data set because it was just over 500. So I think in the future, I'm going to keep adding to it and retraining it with more paintings. Yeah, I really like what it's producing. I like how like abstract, and I really wanted it to feel like fleshy. So I think I achieved that. But I definitely want to keep working with this concept. I think it's cool. I might start using like maybe photographs, maybe combining paintings and photographs. But yeah, and then I really got into the P5, making some like noise loops. So here's what Runway made. The latent spacewalk that Runway made. And then these two I made using P5.
You can almost see the mesh that's like underlying the image as it's like scrolling through the different videos. That's crazy.
Yeah, I really liked working with the video stuff. Yeah, so that's that model. And then the other one I worked on was I took a bunch of stills from Kubrick films, which it turned out very soupy, which is okay. I definitely expected that. But you know, you can't really tell what anything is, which is okay. I just thought it might be a cool thing to try out. I think I want to do this with like Wes Anderson films because they're obviously all like 1-point perspective. A lot of them are symmetrical, so I think that might produce things that are a little bit more recognizable. So I'm working on that data set right now. I didn't have time to train it before this class, but yeah, here's the latent spacewalk video. Yeah, I mean, it's obviously very abstract and I do like it. It's just not, I don't think it's super successful.
Yeah, I tend to find a lot of photographs of spaces definitely have struggle because they're really diverse, right? Like that is just like an inherent challenge of that. Whereas, you know, with the nude paintings, you do get that flesh texture no matter what. And it's just like, it knows what a body looks like.
Yeah.
You know, I wouldn't be surprised if StyleGAN as a whole is just generally like better toward faces and bodies, just because of the way it's built. Like, you know, one of the challenges with a lot of these models is they're modeled on data sets and they like use the same data set over and over and over again. So they're trying to optimize, so they essentially optimize for that data set, and that, you know, the one that StyleGAN tends to be is for faces. So it just tends to work best for faces, those sort of things. So who knows, maybe I assume in the future we'll have new models that work better for architectural scenes or new models that work better for other things. So yeah, this is really, really cool. I'm gonna post in the chat, there's an artist by the name of Robbie Barrett who I'm surprised I didn't mention in that list of like cool AI artists to follow. But Robbie is like, again, one of those like famous sort of like been doing machine learning art for 4 years, which makes them like old school. He also like works a lot with like classical paintings and that sort of thing. So there's a lot of fleshy, blobby things as well. And he's recently started working with Acne and a couple other fashion houses to like generate machine learning designed clothes. So he'll like generally take old photographs of people on the runway and then like manipulate them in machine learning models to generate new patterns and things. So he's definitely a cool person to follow. I just realized his Twitter account is apparently has been suspended, and I don't know how that happened, but like probably posting things that he shouldn't be posting or whatever. But he's also a really interesting person, but like also just kind of a kooky character, to say the least. Very artistic, but has some really interesting work. And the thing is, I think sometimes when I suggest like, hey, you should also check out this work because you're using the same data sets, it can be like, oh no, am I copying that person? And it's like, it's so hard to talk about copying people in this world, because if you're using similar data sets, like the machine learning models end up just looking the same, right? So it's like, I don't want it to sound like, say like, oh, you should check out his work because he's doing the same thing as you. It's more just like, I think there's this interesting artist doing interesting things. And I think, no one should be discouraged from doing similar things with similar data sets, because in the end, you're going to end up with different things as you output them in different ways. So, but I just think he's a really interesting person. And when I saw that, I was like, oh, I should share his work as well. That was really cool. And I'm definitely excited to sort of see like how other models work. I think there is a Wes Anderson, there's a Wes Anderson like backgrounds or Wes Anderson account that exists on Instagram as well that you should take a look at.
Mm-hmm.
I think there's also one that's like, is it like accidentally Wes Anderson, or like some that's like Wes Anderson photos that are not exactly Wes Anderson photos, and that might help you like expand the data set a little bit more as well. So there's definitely like some cool things you could pull from there to sort of get a similar vibe for everything.
For sure. Yeah. Also, I really loved this class, and I'm definitely like going to continue working with this. It's really, really cool. Awesome.
That's great to hear.
Yeah. Okay.
Cool. All right. So we're a little behind schedule, but I think we have some time for that at the end for this. And I think also generally people are doing 5 to 10 minutes. So why don't we take like a 10-minute break, get up, get some water, drink a little bit, walk around a little bit. So let's come back at 7 after, and we'll pick up. I think John, you're next. So we'll pick up there and we'll keep going through it. Cool. All right. See everybody in 10 minutes. John is going to kick us off.
Wait, what happened here? Are you seeing my screen?
It's black right now. Try hitting next and see if something changes.
Anything?
No, I just see a black screen. Does everyone else see a? Maybe stop sharing, and then when you hit the share, just do. You can just share your entire screen or desktop, but that might be what needs to happen there.
Share desktop.
Yep, that looks like that's better.
Okay, you're seeing something. Okay. You seeing book cover archive thing? Okay, great.
Yep.
Well, first of all, Derek, thank you so much for this class. I thought it was really terrific, and I got a lot out of it. A lot of things I never even knew existed. So I can go on, but thanks for that. So my day-to-day life as a graphic designer is, generally to make something that looks good for a client. But my feeling is like, in order to move forward in that space, that you constantly have to challenge the idea or the notion of kind of what looks good, or else you're just kind of listening to what marketers and salespeople think looks good. And so that's kind of what I do in my personal work a bit, is kind of always trying not to make something that looks good or challenging that idea. So I think I mentioned this at the beginning. So one of the reasons I wanted to take this class was, to kind of also pursue that, and also to kind of get out of my own headspace in terms of, the thoughts that I get and how, to kind of grow in that way. So I'll show you these two projects. I probably showed a fair amount of the stuff to some of you guys last week, but I'll walk through it again. So the first thing that I tried, and I was kind of forewarned that this may not kind of work so well, but it was totally worth doing. So there's this archive of book covers, and there's about 1,500 book covers in there. So I had my son, I hired him to drag these all out of here because the site kept going down. So whenever we would see it was up, we go, okay, we have a half hour to do this. So there are like 1,500 book covers, and and I ran them like at different levels and everything. And I mean, I think it kind of showed some of the cool things, but also sort of the deficiencies or the infancy of this technology in a way. Because I think it kind of like, in a way, kind of narrowed down what things were looking like as opposed to kind of expanding it. And but I did find it interesting how it was kind of, you know, trying, you could see certain things happening where it's kind of finding some elements and trying to translate what typography is or what an image might be. I was a little disappointed in like the lack of like color variety. I think that the colors, just everything kind of went brown. At some levels, you would maybe have some green or some brighter red, but then that would kind of disappear as it evolved in the training. And so, you know, that's kind of what these look like. And then I just pulled up some larger ones to share. I mean, you know, they look like alien book covers or some, you know, someone's trying to understand what a book cover is without even knowing what language or a book or anything is. So you see like there's some kind of typography, but it does have some of the elements, you know, there's like centered type and there's like borders. So those things are kind of picked up on. Or this kind of like, oh, maybe that's kind of some hand-drawn kind of wavy letter or something that's kind of being picked up on. I thought these are just kind of interesting, kind of just typographic-ish arrangements of something, just as kind of a layout. And then you can see where it kind of picks up on, you know, the grid structure a little bit. I thought it might be a little more defined because a lot of book covers have, you know, borders and grids and that kind of situation. But you know, these end up, I mean, you know, they kind of look like tapestries of some sort or something. I mean, this, you know, this, again, there's some elements here that are kind of book cover-ish. But to me, they're more reminiscent of what, you know, we might think of in like fabric design. This could be a nice like carpet design or something. And then there's some like real kind of minimal ones, which are kind of cool. And, you know, some of these I think, oh, I could maybe reinterpret this in some way because I would never, ever go in this place to design a book cover. But now I have this whole other kind of space to think about things or to see things. So then they kind of go a little more off the rails, which I think are kind of interesting. So that's those. And then the other thing that I think, the other one which I think was more successful just in terms of reinterpreting something in a way that I think kind of opened up the presentation a little bit. I made this data set of about between 500 and 600 of mostly kind of plaster marble busts that mostly were from the Met Museum, but they had to kind of augment with some other sculpture from some other museums. And the great thing about the Met is that they'll take a sculpture like this. They don't do it for all of them. So it's happened sporadically, but they'll photograph it from all sides. So you get all these things being as part of the input. And I thought having an element like this to be really interesting to have as just part of the equation, as opposed to having them all kind of translated to, you know, faces and heads. And, you know, I thought what came out of it was, I mean, to me was really interesting. And it really ran the gamut. Like every time I would open this up, you get some other kind of variant and all these other things happening. I mean, it was like every single one was almost good. And I you know, and of course I'm judging it from my perspective of how I see art through my Western, you know, eyes. But so I, you know, they start, you know, you kind of get these things that, oh, they look just pretty much like a bust sculpture, but then not really. But they have all, you know, the elements, the pedestals there. The facial details kind of get lost, I think, as other things are being interpreted. Then they start to, you know, kind of veer off into other places. I mean, this is actually a little closer to reality, but, you know, there's just that kind of swooping thing going on. It's pretty cool. And then they started to get kind of progressively more abstract. In this presentation, I'm kind of showing them in that progression, but you can see like where the folds and the fabrics can kind of start informing, you know, how the entire thing looks. So these start looking like H.R. Geiger or something like that. I don't even know. Like this crazy stuff. But I thought, you know, the way it captured that it was how the textures got captured pretty well. So it looks like a real thing. And you could see like in the bottom part where that might be the back of the sculpture kind of helped inform that. But you know, these things, this looks like this like flat, strange, you know, who knows what. And some floating kind of godhead of some sort. And they get like really abstract. You get like that, the monolith. So then, you know, after doing this, and I'm like, you know, I love this class, but I don't really know, like, what do I do next? Or do I do anything next? Or is this it? Or, you know, I really don't have any plan. You know, one thing I was like, oh, it would be great to like 3D print these, but you know, that's beyond my kind of scope of understanding things. Or, you know, I will make like a zine or book every once in a while. So this could be cool. I'll do like a newspaper of like 1,000 of these or something that, and they could be small. That would be kind of cool. But then I just, you know, I do this other thing I do in my free time is I do some collage work. And so it's funny, I look back and these are some things I did about a year or two ago, and where I used like the half title page from a book, and they're not that far different than some of those book covers that we just saw. So, you know, I just kind of showed some of those, and then I printed out some of those sculptures, and I just started kind of playing around with them and cutting them out and like kind of reassembling things, and with my crappy printer, so they really look bad. But you know, bringing things back in, like the background becomes foreground and that kind of stuff. So that's just kind of what I did with those. And then, you know, the final element that I did was I started to kind of make these little clay things that were sort of kind of informed by some of the things on there. And so this is what I do like during interminable Zoom calls. Not this one, of course, but that's what I tell everybody. No, I'm not doing that during your. So that's kind of where this whole path took. So I thought it was really great, and I really look forward to it each week. So thank you, Derek. I had one question. I'll throw it out now, but you can answer at the end if you're not. Is there a music version of this kind of thing that someone teaches? And I'll just throw that out there. So that's the end of my story.
Everyone asks about a music thing, and I've yet to find someone who wants to teach it. Although I feel like I can probably find someone. I want to do a music version for sure, because there's definitely like people are getting better at the music stuff, and there's some cool tools out there for this as well. I also love those collages. I think even just printing them on a crappy printer like adds an additional sort of like texture to it that it just looks really cool. So I'm really excited to see more of that. I think I want to sort of think about like, I'll actually try one of these myself, is just like doing some like book covers in the new ADA model. I have a sense that it might work better. So I might give that a shot and just sort of see how it goes, and I'll share it with you if I get a chance to. Just because that ADA model has a little bit more, it injects color into the training system. So it should hopefully keep color a little bit better. I think the text will always look like garbage just because text is really hard for machines to interpret, but I think there's some interesting opportunities there for sure. Yeah.
I could share that data set if you want it. So if you've ever
that'd be cool. Yeah, that'd be great. Cool. All right. Who is up next? Let's see. Looks like Ellie, you're up next.
It's been so cool to see everyone's work so far. Oh, for some reason, I have to quit Zoom. I don't use Zoom for work, and I guess I've never screen shared. So hold on. Is someone
so we can do this.
Want to go?
So yeah, so I'll have so Chris, why don't you go? And while Chris goes, Ellie can restart or do whatever she needs to do to be able to share. Does that sound good?
Sure thing. That sounds good. Let me just share.
Cool.
All right, Can everybody see that?
We can, yep.
Okay. Yeah, first of all, Derek, thank you so much. It has been such a wonderful class and so cool to see everyone's work. Sorry, I got two screens going on here. I'm just trying to organize myself a little bit. Put that up there. Okay. So cool to see everyone's work. I've really enjoyed it. Literally, my only downside is that I wish I had more time to put into this thing. Feels like I've just scratched the surface of something that, as you say, is like a really, or can be a really deep dive. So I'm looking forward to experimenting more. I thought I would just start with kind of the way I did my data set, because it seems like I did that a little differently to everyone else. And I know Steve was kind of asking about it last week. Let me just first start off by showing you this. Oh no, sorry, wrong one. Oh no. This is my very primitive setup that I started with. I was messing around on my daughter's Etch-a-Sketch one day, and so this is kind of where I ended up and what created my images. Basically, I was going to do an art show right before COVID. I think I mentioned this last week. And while the art here has turned out completely different, the premise was essentially that it was going to be an image generated art show, you know, automated, randomly collected art that then I just essentially curated. So what I ended up with here was, is the Zoom, all of our gallery, is that in the way for you guys, or does that not show up?
We can see it, yeah.
In all of our heads, yeah, cool, okay.
Yep.
So basically what I'm trying to do here is essentially run this script that is going to generate my data set without me having to touch anything, essentially. And let me start off by saying I am not a coder. I don't know, I have a decent knowledge of computers, but I don't really know anything about code. There's a website called Code Mentor, and a guy from that website helped me with all of this. And Derek, you probably know a lot more, and this could be a really primitive and roundabout way to go about it, but it works. So essentially walking you through what I ended up with, here is one folder of 500 of these Etch-a-Sketch kind of images that I blasted out at random over a couple of nights. And then it's all using actions in Photoshop. I'm sure everyone's kind of across the way actions work. And then I also had 500 of these weird and whacked out color kind of, there's some really cool ones in here, color things. And so a little demo here, I'll just go to my output file. I'm just going to delete these 5. And if I go over to here and run this click script, it's basically going to click on this thing, which is going to open Photoshop, which is then going to run my actions, which is then going to spit images into this output folder. So off we go. I'll just do like 5 or something, make it nice and quick. But you can see that it says 100 repeats in the bottom script. I can basically tell it, and that pops up sometimes, I don't know why. But I can basically tell it to do as many as I like. We'll just do a couple more. It's a little sluggish sometimes, I guess, because it's trying to open the file in Photoshop. Like I would set it for 100 repeats, and then I'd only end up with like 89 or something. And it stopped working. I don't know why. This has never happened, but maybe Zoom is kind of messing with it or something. There we go. There you go. All right, well, there's 4. So as you can see, it works, but by no means is it like a perfect piece of code, but we've now ended up with 4 new random images. And so I did 1,000 of those. Let's do it this way. So there's 1,000 of those guys there. And I didn't really, in an ideal world, I would have had time to crop and like clean them up and all that sort of stuff. I totally didn't have that time, so I didn't really edit them down too much. I just did 1,000, and then that was my data set. Here's some like favorites that I quickly pulled out. I really liked sort of ones that had some sort of relationship between the color and the squiggle, like this one, for example. Yeah, that was sort of what I was going for. And so that was my data set. And then when I threw it into Runway, where are we? I sort of haven't played around too much in Runway. This is kind of where I want to go from here and you know, build on. But I expected that some of the colors were going to disappear and sort of mute out a little bit, just based off what I've been seeing with everyone else's work. But I think it did a pretty good job. This was 6,000 steps, you can see there. And yeah, I think it did a pretty nice job. There's some really cool stuff. Based off seeing Ryan's little signature, I knew that sort of this, sorry, you guys can't see, this kind of thing was a little mark that was on the Etch-a-Sketch itself, and I knew it was going to show up in sort of every single one. But you know, it's kind of cool. It was really good to get like some really vibrant colors. I kind of didn't expect it was going to happen. And this one just looks straight up like a fish. So that's kind of why I put that one in there. And so then I started to mess around a little, just in, I think I was in Premiere, just, actually, let me show you the videos first. So this is my free spacewalk. But then I just started to do a few of my own in Runway. And these turned out pretty cool. I really like them. I like the abstractness of them. I think moving forward, I'd like to make them like, yeah, clean them up to try and make them almost sort of try and remove some of that ML texture that you talk about, Derek. And yeah, where are we? Then I started to play around, in Premiere, just like starting to layer up stuff and you know, play with blending modes and stuff, and obviously inverting and just trying to like use two different interpolations. And like I really am interested in like, yeah, the relationship between two random things, I suppose, and sort of challenging, sort of similar in a way to what John was talking about, challenging like what you can push out and in an unexpected way. I really like this one and the way the two things play together, and I was sort of trying to make the speeds intentionally different. So you can see one kind of stops and the other starts, and they sort of play off each other. It's like a dance or something, which I really find cool. I think that was about it. Yeah, I was just messing around here. This one's really fun. I'm really into like grungy, wildly saturated things. All of those colors, they're kind of blown out, blurry colors, came from me walking around my phone taking photos of like street posters and that sort of thing. So that's basically where I landed, and that's all I've got. But yeah, I had an absolute blast doing this. I think the only other sort of my intention in terms of where I'd like to go from here is digging into the, what's it called, P5 JS, to use what we did last week in terms of splitting out the frames of the video, and then kind of use all this script here on the other side to then like automate again and then put it back together as a video, and see what happens kind of on both ends. I thought that would be kind of cool, but I'm not quite there yet. But if and when I get there, I'll drop that in the Slack group for sure. But yeah, thanks, Derek. It was so much fun.
Yeah, awesome. I love it. Really excited to sort of see where you keep going with it. One of the things I just find really fascinating about this work, and it's something that I don't generally talk about a lot, but I just love the idea of taking a static thing, right? You've got all these static images and then being able to put them in motion, which is like a thing that is very hard to do with any other tool. But because of GANs and the way that they build this latent space, you can take any of your static images and convert them into textures that then can be animated. So I think it's a really fascinating way to work. And I think, again, we're in the early days of this stuff, and I think over time it will get even better and better. And like, you'll actually be able to take your images, like your pure images, and be able to animate them using these spaces in really cool ways. So yeah, I'm really excited to sort of see how that goes.
Cool. Yeah, awesome.
Cool. All right, thank you. Ellie, are we ready to go?
I think so. I hope. I've like only had to use Google Hangouts before, so okay, it worked. Yay.
Yep, it
you
works.
guys can see
Yep.
the screen, right?
We
Cool.
can. Yep.
Okay, so I thought I'd start off by just showing some of the models I was playing around with like the first week that I was really drawn to. I loved the kid art one. I just loved how chaotic it was. It definitely like inspired kind of what I wanted to do with the class. I knew that I was going to be drawn to more like weirdly like soupier data sets. So yeah, it definitely made me think about what I wanted to do with my data set. One of the first data sets I ran as a model was the Scenic Simpsons one, which was really fun. So I just scraped it off of this Instagram account. But I wasn't like super happy with the result. I mean, I didn't really try to put any constraints on anything. I kind of was just like, here it goes. And I think this was like one of the first steps, or maybe like step 500, and then this is step 3000. So not much difference. I didn't really recognize much, but I did think that the outputs were much more interesting than the sample images. So this was kind of one of the videos, and then these were some of the output images. It definitely kind of gave me an idea of what my data set was going to be, because I knew I wanted to do something that was kind of like all over the place too. So yeah, that was good. There's some other ones. I really like the colors. So yeah, for my data set, I basically kind of wanted to use like all these things I've been collecting over the years. When I travel, I tend to like want to archive everything. So I'll like grab brochures. I'm taking a lot of photos. So this is kind of like from, I think like 4 years of traveling. And then I also came, my parents just gave me like a bunch of their photos from traveling in the 80s. So I thought it would be cool to mix with that. So it's kind of a mixture of photos. I thought for the first time I run it, I was like, I'm going to try to put some constraint on it. I'm going to try to kind of like make all the colors. I did like a simple gradient map to all the images. And it's like, I think it's like only like 4 gradient maps. So these are some of them, but this is like the whole data set. I definitely want to do more eventually. I think this was like only like 500. And then this is how it started out. So pretty weird that I liked seeing the faces, honestly. And then this was step 3000. So just cool textural stuff. I think I wasn't super happy with how it turned out, but I kind of was like, this will be cool as like overlays. And it definitely did, because later I've been kind of using them as like linear burns on some photos in Photoshop. But yeah, these are some of them. They kind of look like quilts, like that one does. But I like the colors. I thought there would be more like figure ground relationship, but it didn't really show up. So the next step, I was just like, I'm gonna put everything in there, no constraints, just like see what happens. And you can see it's very varied. So I just have some like random skinned and stuff, hand drawings, brochures, and all the photographs were like film though. So I thought maybe that quality would carry, but wasn't really sure. And the stuff turned out way weirder. I liked it a lot more. So I think this is step 3000, and this is step 8000 or 5000. I definitely wanted to train it more maybe, but this is kind of where I stopped. This is one of the, I think it's step 3000. This is the video for that, the lane space walk. There's definitely some overfitting like that, like tree texture comes in a lot, but it's pretty cool. And then this is, I think, step 5000, and this one has much more movement to it. What I like about them though is like when they're like really small, like I was looking at them and I was like starting to kind of fill in my head, okay, this looks like this one place, you know? So I thought that was like cool about it, because I was just like looking through all of them and just like kind of assigning memories to them, even though it probably wasn't true. So just like weird memory art. And then when they're bigger, they're obviously like more abstract. But got some really cool ones. I like the texture. And yeah, these ones too. Some of them are like really gloopy. And then I just started playing around with Photoshop with kind of overlaying them. Definitely using like the color ones is more like linear burns, but getting some really cool textures and colors from the more like photographic ones. So super fun. I think I want to print them eventually. I really like appreciate this class just because I've been wanting to do something with this stuff I've been collecting for years, but it's been hard for me to like try to make something purposeful and not purposeful at the same time. Like I feel like every time I was going into Photoshop, I was like, why am I using this filter? Like, what's the point? So I really like how this class kind of like puts more meaning to that in like a generative art way. I really, really enjoyed it. So thank you so much. And I really like seeing everyone's work too.
Yeah, what I love about this is just like, you know, even the linear burn ones that you're like adding just texture on top, like I think you've talked about this a little bit, like the memory or like false memories or just like ways like the haziness of a memory, like you're bringing that texture and it does sort of like have that immediate feeling. And yeah, it's just cool. I love that you were just like, fuck it, I'm gonna throw it everything. Like it just like I think it's totally valuable to just like try it and just see what happens, right? And like you know, the nice thing about a lot of stuff is like I was noticing in your work, like or in the images, is like even with a model that had like a bunch of images in it that were just sort of thrown together, you found a couple really good images in there, right? And it's like, I think Ryan, and maybe you were talking about this on Twitter, I think, where it's like, this is like a curation tool, maybe more so than like every individual image that comes out of this thing is gonna be great. Instead, it's like, you let it go, you like go to bed and you wake up in the morning and you find a couple images you like out of it, right? You pull things out of it that you can find value in. Or you find ways to take even a bad model and like turn it into good using like those filters and things. So yeah, what I really love is like I also think that designers in many ways by our nature are just like we're hoarders. We like just hoard like images and other resources, and like this is a cool way to utilize some of those things or just see what happens when you utilize those things. So yeah, some really cool stuff. I'm really excited to sort of see where it keeps going. Cool. So I believe Steve, you're up next.
So I just opened up Premiere to see if I could load in like two. I'm like, I need to take Chris's idea and like see what that looks like when the two videos I have are dancing together. Didn't make it in time, but I guess that's what it is.
You can put it on
okay.
Slack once you're done. Yeah, you can put it on Slack later. Yeah.
All right, so let me share my screen and we'll just go to where we are. So yeah, super excited to have everything be like downloaded into my brain, and like there's so much more content that you just gave us to like parse through. Super grateful. So I started off with the idea of like just generating 1,000 of my own drawings. And so this is kind of like a taste of like the types of images that I was making. The whole thing was streamed on Twitch. I don't know, that was just like that was like a whole nother part of the process that like I found was really interesting, to have like a public digital practice instead of having the process be very private and having the product be very public. I thought of like flipping it. So rather than share the products, I haven't shared anything publicly about what the products look like, but rather be sharing actively about what that process looked like. I thought that was like conceptually really interesting. So you can kind of see like most of my drawings were about like building form in a very like structural way. You kind of had like objects that were more like foundational in their shapes, and then things would be built on top of them. And they all had like a very sculptural feeling to them. So this is kind of like where I started with the 1,000 drawings, and they kind of changed over time. Some shapes morphed into others, but there were some general trends in terms of how the shapes appeared. And I think the AI really picked up on that. So fed the 1,000 images into the machine, and you can kind of see all of them that were generated on the right. I picked out some that I thought were interesting, but then at the same time, you could also see that they were definitely overfitting, and like some shapes were definitely being repeated. So like the bottom shape here would be repeated, half of it would be repeated, and then the other half would be like split. right? So it was informative in like helping me think about how else I could use my existing shapes, but it wasn't very generative. It wasn't really able to make new shapes or new compositions in ways that really extended beyond like my own imagination. So I felt that was a little bit disappointing. What I was hoping that it would be able to do, where I guess the limitations of the StyleGAN model in Runway plus like how long I trained it of only 5,000 steps was it didn't pick up on the color differences between the shapes. So I ended up with just like very like the overall composition could change, but the colors would maintain like one shape itself. And so I think that was really akin to this idea of being trained on faces. It recognized imagery as skin and like these abstract structures as like skin. So it would just like blotch everything together. So still pretty cool stuff. Like I guess ultimately when I set truncation value to like 1 and like went to like the weird wild west of my model of things that didn't really fit what it thought was my stuff, it still turned out really cool stuff. But like you could still definitely see the face, right? Like there were definitely still like the eyes and the mouth were still appearing, which is interesting to me in a different world where I'm not drawing sculptural and I'm drawing faces. I think it could be interesting to play in that realm and like merge these two data sets together and see what comes forth. But I think overall I did like how like textural wise you kind of had like this little bit of like airbrushing going on where we would like try to put in shadows in places that shadows didn't exist. And so I thought that was pretty rad. So then because of this process of like cleaning up the data set, I really felt like the most tedious part was cleaning the data set. Like generating the data set was tedious as hell. And that took like 10 days, but it felt playful and fun, right? Like where like I could pick the background color and then like pick each color for the shape and like that felt very in line with my process. I hated cleaning the data set and that was like hell for me because like going in and like finding like the right center for the crop and like scaling up and down and like rescaling made my head hurt. So along the way, I started playing with like layering because I had like each image was being ported into Photoshop. So I was blending layers and I found that process to be really fun. And so I think moving forward and taking these 1,000 images that I've generated as a resource, I think it's been really cool to utilize them to generate new compositions, right? So because when I overlay them, the colors shift, I can begin to see like new shapes emerge, right? And I think that is where the generative of new shapes in line with how I draw has been very fruitful. Something else that I kind of noticed as I was generating the ML images was the textures that were originally present with my images were covered by the machine learning goopy textures that made everything super soft and skin-like. But like the variety and wildness of like layering together just 2 images was already pretty crazy. But like when you did like 5, 6, 10, that kind of got into the territory of like what I thought would be possible originally, right? But this is kind of like a nice addendum of like, oh, well, I didn't have it happen in the machine, but I do have a process within Photoshop that allows me to still create these compositions and create new textures and edit and play in a way that I think artistically I'm more comfortable with. So this is just like a small sample of those images, but like really because there were some similarities within my original compositions, it was really easy to kind of like fit everything together into these new compositions, which where I think when the machine started to talk like do its overfitting and like separate things into the categories that it knew me to like draw well in, I think that's really similar to what is happening here, but this is happening with color, so it's really easy to mix things up. So that's that. Then I really like that process in my own drawing, so I felt I would draw inspiration from that and then do it with machine objects. I found this was a little more interesting in terms of outputs and images that were created because similarly, I could kind of blend together the colors that weren't present in the original machine learning inputs and create new compositions in a way that I felt were more resonant with what I was expecting out of the process. So these are just quick sampling. You can kind of see like if you use like multiple layers and the burnings and like the color dodgings and the whatnots, that's where like the cool stuff started to happen. So I hope I'll try to train on StyleGAN 288 and see if they have a better sense of like picking out the different colors. And if not, I'll probably still continue this process of blending in this way to generate new images, because I feel like this is very resonant for me. And then I spoke last week about the whole thing of like grabbing through screen capturing on Runway through the video editor. And I plopped that all together and just like color dodged the whole thing. And this is what I ended up with. So definitely potential to generate really crazy stuff there. So I'd love to also try like Chris's scripting process and like see if I can have like load in the 1000 layers of my images into Photoshop and like cue a script to like turn certain ones on and off and then cue like transparency. That would be a really cool thing. But I have no idea how the hell to do that. So I'll have to talk to you guys after. So this is what the videos look like. Can you see the video? Yes? Okay, cool. So like definitely it's shifting between colors and it feels very lava lampy. And so I really enjoyed this, but I feel like the process of picking images out in Runway felt a little limited because I wasn't able to identify what the vector was for each image that I wanted to pick in the video editor. Right. So in terms of Runway improvements, I would hope in the future, the images that they're generating, we can at least right click and save those individual vectors. So we have a little more creative control moving forward. But you can kind of see like the shapes are pretty similar, right? Like they oscillate between like basically 5 different configurations of like this like these styles. And then you'll have like the occasional weird ML like strangeness leak into there to create like some new image, but overall it's pretty much that. And then so like kind of like right here where I first start, this is like the middle where you see the orange and that negative space. That's where like my drawing structure is, right? And then this like purple pleed that you see everywhere is that ML strangeness. So I think there's still some possibility to generate new shapes, but not as much as I wanted to. Oh, yeah. All in all, I think that's where I landed up at in terms of moving forward. I'm curious what I'm really interested in durational insanity, so I'm curious what another 10,000, 50,000 drawings could look like and what that process would be like if I continued to live stream it. I feel like I've stopped live streaming because I don't know like publicly what I want to share versus private art practice, but I feel like this as a practice is a very I'm very comfortable doing it publicly, and it's very generative and playful for me. In terms of where these things belong, I'm very curious. I love seeing like Ryan's like physical object, and I think I resonate a lot with like that digital analog, and like John collaging. So I think I might play a little bit with that translation in a public way as well, and I'll see where that goes and let you guys know. But yeah, that's me. Thanks, guys. Super grateful
Awesome.
to get to know all of you.
Yeah, this is great. It's so interesting. I mean, you guys are partly my guinea pigs just to sort of see like comparing your data set to Chris's data set. I would assume they would have more in common, right? But like what the machine actually did to them is very different. And I have no idea why that is, right? This is like, I've taught this class 6 times now. I've made these classes many times, and I've never seen such a stark comparison between those two, where like the data set coming in looks fairly similar, but like coming out, it decided to do very different things. And yeah, it's wildly fascinating and also kind of really frustrating because you're like, how did you not learn the thing I wanted you to learn? Like, what's the deal? And it's like playing a game with someone who doesn't speak the same language as you, right? Or like with an alien, right? Where like you're trying to figure out like, if I change these parameters in the data set, will you do something different? And like it might, but it might do something different in a way you didn't expect it to. So yeah, it's such a challenge, but it's so interesting to sort of see what comes out of these things. In the chat, I'm going to paste the video, which is like the bare minimum, like how to train on Colab in using Stalgan 2 ADA. So feel free to like take a look at that. You might want to watch all of the Colab videos before jumping into this, just because if it's just like an interface, you're like, what am I doing here? But if you follow this step by step, it should work for you.
Cool.
But yeah, I'm happy to talk about that. Oops, I just sent that to John privately. Send it to everyone. So that's the link. So yeah, take a look at that. And like I said, I'm happy to answer any questions that folks have if they want to give this a shot. So yeah.
Oh yeah. I think one thing might also be the whiteness of the background that I might play with in terms of like future generation of like just being able to separate between shape and space, like the foreground background thing. Because I think because there were so many colors, it like the rainbow like identificator or whatever that it like is built on probably just got fragged and is like, nope, this is all skin and that's it. So I might try like differentiating that way.
Yeah, that's a great, I mean, I have, again, it's like, I've seen so many of these models and I still can tell you like how it sort of pulls apart these things, but that's a great idea. I do think like what Chris did differently was like, right, his are all, the foreground background is like very clear, right? There's white, but there's the shape, or there's a color inside the shape. So yeah, maybe playing with that would work. Cool. All right, Allison, you're last to go.
Awesome. All right, let me just share real quick. Can everyone see my screen?
We can.
Okay, awesome. Great. Wait, I'm trying to remember what the view. Whatever. I'll just pan through. But it was really interesting to work on this. And basically, I just wanted to show something really at first. I really just took baby steps when I was learning this because I didn't want to dive in too much and then like just be like, oh, well, I really didn't get the right thing there. But it was really fun to play with the eye data set. I just pulled like 500 images of left eyes. I didn't get too in depth. But it was really fun and interesting seeing when I was training those 3,000 steps over it to see over the faces, how that was reacting and how it kind of made these like weird cyclops in the middle. So that was really interesting. And I loved how that was rendering. And then it ended up turning into this, which was really awesome. And what I wanted to see too from creating this was to see how I could actually make generative graphic art from it. And so something I wanted to experiment with, and I wasn't sure if this was going to work. So I just took a baby step with it, was to see how it could actually come together as like generated halftones. And I was so happy to see that this actually worked successfully. Just bringing it through Bridge and just using a couple actions really made this awesome graphic piece. And I think next steps, I really want to keep collecting data sets, especially like photo-based, and just see kind of how I could keep pushing this and eventually create something that's maybe like music reactive. But yeah, it was so fun to explore with this. And yeah, and seeing everyone's work has been so inspiring. So I'm really excited to see how I could keep pushing this. Yeah.
Awesome. I mean, yeah, I love this graphic piece because it really does, it takes it sort of, like I could look at this and I wouldn't necessarily know that it was a StyleGAN model, but like it's just one of those things where it's like, oh, how did they make this animate and with halftone? It's again, it's almost like you hand drew it all, and I was like, oh, okay, that's cool. But yeah, it's really great.
Yeah, it was so fun to play with, and it's so nice to see like it actually all just come together. So it's been really cool. Yeah, but that's the extent of it. I just want to be super quick because I know like we've all been going through with time, but yeah.
Oh no, it's fine. But yeah, I definitely, I think everyone was also really excited about that very first screen too, of like the thumb people or the people with Cyclops eyes, or like it's just really interesting too that it even the images that still have two eyes, like they get centralized, or like I'm looking at this one like right in the middle here. This, I guess it looks like a woman, but like the eyes sort of converge into one space, so it's like. And I don't want to be mean, but it's like they almost look cross-eyed, but it's like it just in this like really weird way where it's like it is really interesting that all this stuff gets pulled together. And like yeah, so a lot of people like, you know, there's a good amount of artists who just sort of focus in like just these in-between points to generate these really interesting looking things. But yeah, it's really cool. I would also love I've never gotten around to do this because I'm lazy, but I would love to see almost like if you did an eye and another eye and then a nose and a mouth, and you could like actually have like them almost in a grid where like they could interpolate all in their own way. I think that'd be really cool to see. Yeah.
I agree. Yeah, that would be awesome. I got to play with that for sure.
Cool. Awesome. Well, this has been a really fun class. I hope everyone had fun in some way or another. And I hope that you all stay in touch. Like you're more than welcome to message me. Please feel free to continue to use the channel as if you want to share some work. One thing I also want to say is if you haven't already, in the Slack channel, there's a channel called Share Projects. And I would highly recommend if you want to share some of your work, like to share it here. Because there's just like, it's always great to see other people's work. And I think like one thing I've found just through like running the Slack channel is people always want to see cool work. So please feel free to share it. I don't like everything you've shown is awesome and no one should be afraid to like share their work with this group. So Fabiola actually was in one of my classes and she was just a part of this this NeurIPS gallery using a cool project she did. So, you know, no one should be afraid like, oh, I've only taken 5 weeks of this, like just share stuff because it's really cool. So I'd love to see your work there either now or like in the future. So please feel free to share more stuff.
Is there a way to make your models like semi-private where it's like you can access each other's models on Runway?
Yeah, that's a challenge. I don't think it's possible to do semi-private. I think it's either private or public, which is kind of frustrating. I know that
or
Runway
the pickle
is
files? Could
yeah, you
we
could share the
share pickle files? Because like I would love to play with some of your guys' pickle like things in Colab once I figure that all out too.
Yeah, you can do that. One thing I would ask is like, don't share them directly through Slack, like share them on a Dropbox link or a Drive link, because I'm on the free Slack plan, like they'll like obliterate all the old files with like huge 380 megabyte files, but like host them on Drive or something and like let people know. But yeah, there's also, I haven't like, cause we don't need this for this class, but like there is a, what is it? Awesome Style GAN. A friend of mine has, yeah, this is what it is. A friend of mine has started like a GitHub of just like cool models that other people have sent him. So like one of my models is in there. There's some other models in there as well. So if you want to play around with some other free models, these are a little hard. They're like hard to bring into Runway, but you can play with them in Colab for sure.
Oh yeah.
I'll drop this link in the chat real quick for folks. Yeah, cool. So I hope that you had fun. And again, like, please feel free to stay in touch. And hopefully I'll see you around the internet or Slack for a while. So hope everyone has good holidays between now and the end of the year. And yeah, it was really, really fun to have everybody in class. So thank you so much.
Thanks, Derek.
Thank you,
All
guys.
right.
Thanks,
everybody.
All the best.
Really happy to
Yeah,
meet
thank
y'all.
you.
Yeah, and
Yeah.
I'll post the video as well as today's slides in the Slack channel later tonight. Cool. All right. Bye, everybody.
Cool.
All right,
Yeah.
stay safe.
Bye.